Remember I told you he had a wife, Sasama Berete, the most beautiful of all, the shining one, the one whose son should have taken the throne. Can you imagine being told that you would no longer be the queen mother, that your son would no longer ascend to the throne, that you were being displaced by another, that this woman would now give birth to the future king of Mali, and that you had been relegated? Can you imagine how she felt? Furthermore, all of this, not because of beauty, but because of some fantasy, some prophecy. And this woman was repugnant. Her heart broke into many pieces and was replaced by anger and rage and spite. And just like most women, instead of turning her anger on Magan Konfata, she turned her anger on Sogolon Keju. And she spread spiteful rumors. She said the reason why Sogolon Keju's face had to be covered was because if a woman who was carrying a child looked upon her, she would miscarry immediately. And the people believed it. The king's sisters loved Sasama Berete. And when they understood that she was hurt, they turned also their spite against poor Sogolon Keju. Sogolon Keju was being cared for and had become the warden of the king's auntie. And every day she wept, and every day the woman said to her, "Why do you weep? This is your destiny. This is your life. This is your future. Don't mind them. Don't mind them and their spiteful words. You are destined for greatness." And on her wedding day, the old woman prepared her hair. And yet still Sogolon wept in her lap. And the old woman lost all patience. She said, "Sogolon Keju, dry your tears. Dry those tears. You are more fortunate than you think. Today you will marry a king. Today you will become a queen. Tomorrow your belly will be filled with a child. This is a time for celebration." And when the hair had been plaited and when she'd been dressed in the white dress and when she finally put on the white kerchief, she was led outside, and people had come from the four corners of the kingdom to witness this great spectacle. Firstly, because it was their king, but secondly, because they were curious. Who was the king marrying? And why was her face covered? The drummers drummed, and then the king's brother came forwards, as was the tradition, lifted her onto his shoulders and ran away, only to be coaxed back so the king could be married. And then there was a wedding. And at a wedding, there's always drumming. And there's always dancing. And there's always clapping. Well, that should have been, thank you. There should have been great love and passion in the royal bedchamber. This is what the whole thing had been leading to. And whilst outside everyone was eating and drinking and enjoying, Magan Konfata was trying to do the deed. When Sogolon stretched her arms up and wrapped them around his neck, when he encircled her waist and pulled her towards him, he noticed something. Thick black hairs began to sprout from every pore on her body. The top of her head seemed to, and there was a hardness there. Her hands, which were hooked around his neck, there was a hardness there. And when he looked back, she had the aspect of a buffalo. She was channeling her grandmother. And Magan Konfata recoiled. But when he let go of her, the hairs disappeared. The face of the buffalo disappeared. The hands became soft. And so he approached again, same thing. He approached a third time, same thing. And by the morning, he was exhausted. And the woman who came to display the sheet that should have been stained with virginal blood was ushered away quickly. And the king staggered out of the royal bedchamber, bathed in sweat. And his griot, his praise singer, ran forward and he said, "Majesty, what's wrong?" And the king said, "This was a mistake. This should never have happened. This is no ordinary woman. This prophecy is madness. I should never have done this." And "Listen," said the griot, "listen. You have to impregnate this woman. It is written. It is the prophecy. You must take courage." Magan Konfata thought of all that he had risked for this moment, and he said, "Very well, tonight." But that same night, the same thing happened. All night he tried. All night Sogolon was ready, but nothing happened. On the third night, Sogolon Keju lay in bed, and she was aware that her husband, the king, was not beside her. She sat up, and she saw that the king was sitting cross-legged on the ground, bent over, looking at something. She stepped forwards and she touched him gently on the shoulder. "Sire, what do you do?" And he was looking at a pile of sand, white sand. And he was trailing his fingers in the white sand, and he was saying, "Sogolon, I think we've made a mistake. I think possibly we've misinterpreted the prophecy. Perhaps when they say I must spill the blood of a virgin of Segu, it does not mean that I must take your maidenhead. Perhaps I'm just meant to kill you." And Sogolon said, "No. No, I don't want to die. Let's try again." He said, "Sogolon, it's impossible. But if to fulfill the prophecy I must spill your blood, then spill your blood I will." And he reached for his sword. He said, "Sogolon, say your prayers." Sogolon said, "Please, I don't want to die." He said, "Say your prayers. Make your peace with God, Sogolon, because I'm sorry. Tonight you die." And he put the cold steel of his sword against her throat. And when she felt that, she was so afraid that she fainted. And that night, Sundiata Keita, the line of Manding, was conceived. Alebie sisi mona, alebie sisi mona, alebie sisi mona, alebie sisi mona. And from that moment, Sogolon Keju grew into her royal status, literally. Her belly became round and fat, and Magan Konfata, when he went out on warring parties, all of the spoils of war were brought to her and dropped at her feet. When the servants went into the market, the best of garments were brought and put before her feet, and she was given the best of food, and she walked around the palace as though she was born to it, which of course we know she was. But Sasama Berete, when she saw Sogolon Keju walking through her palace, being lauded by her husband, it cut like a knife. And so she sent for 7 sorcerers. And she told those 7 sorcerers, "This woman must not go to full term. I want her to lose this child. I want it to fall out of her. Blokoto! I want her to feel the pain of miscarriage. The child cannot be born." And so the sorcerers, they took the job, they took it on. And one night they approached Sogolon's chamber. And above the lintel of the door there were 3 owls. Not 1, not 2, but 3. And anyone who knows anything about African mythology and African culture, 1 owl is bad enough. There were 3 owls. And the 7 sorcerers went back to Sasama Berete. And they said, "Queen, this woman is powerfully protected. You cannot harm her." "Very well," she said. "Let the child be born, and then we will see." And then the day came. The first pangs of labor, the pushing, the straining. The king watched as the midwives began to run this way and that way in a flurry. He said to the griot, "What's happening?" The griot said, "I think it's time, Majesty, it's time." The king said, go and see what you can see and come back and tell me. And so the griot, he ran and he watched through the open door as the women helped Sogolon, and she pushed the crowning. He ran back to the king. He said, Majesty, the head. He said, go back and come and tell me when you see the shoulders. And so the griot went back and they helped Sogolon as she pushed down the shoulders. He went back, he said, Majesty, your child's shoulders are born. He said, go back and tell me when you see my son. And so the griot ran back and he stood and he watched as the midwives took the weight of Sogolon's heavy body. And as she bore down, and as she pushed, and with one final scream, Sundiata Keita was born. And the griot ran back and he said, Majesty, you have a fine son. He is beautiful. What will you name him? And Magan Komfata, he said, this is an auspicious day. This is an auspicious day. Therefore, this child can have not one name, not two names, but three names. He will be the first king to be named 3 times. I will call him Maganjata for me. I will call him Marijata for my father. And I will call him Sogolon Jata for his mother. Go and tell the griots. And so out they ran to tell the griots. Okay? And the griots shouted the names from all the towers of the palace. Okay? You're the griots. Okay? Marijata. Marijata. In rhythm. Marijata. Marijata. Maganjata. Maganjata, 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 Sogolonjata, 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 Sogolonjata. They sang the names out, the people heard the names, the people came from the 4 corners of the kingdom with gifts and offers of this and that to help the son grow into the great king that he would be. Magan Komfata almost emptied his grain bins, giving to the people. And Sasama Berete, can you imagine? She had to demonstrate her largesse. And so she decided that any woman who had given birth on the same day as that one would get a bag of gold. Long may he live, long may he live, long may he live. And that should have been the end of the story, right? They should all live happily ever after, right? Yes. No. Strange things. First of all, his eyes rolled independently in his head. His head, I know every baby's head is big, but his head was big. When Sogolon latched him to her breast, he sucked with such vigor that he drew blood. He was never satisfied. She would have to pluck him from her breast. She decided that this child was not a blessing but a curse. Because as he grew, the things that he should have been doing, the toddling, didn't happen. The mama, mama, da, 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 those things that you look forward to as a parent, none of that was happening. He just would, the eyes would roll and then he would stop and he would stare. And that look was so unnerving. Grown men blushed in the presence of the child. When he got to the age when he definitely should have been walking, he wasn't. He was dragging himself around on his backside. And Sasama Berete was delighted. She sent her son in. She said, go and play with your brother. Hop, skip, jump, dance. Nothing was promised for my child, but at least he can walk. And Sogolon was so ashamed. She tried to encourage all of the courtiers to bring their children to play with him, but he was so strong, he was too strong. He'd pick them up and throw them across the room, and they'd gather their children up and give backward, dirty glances to him. What was he? And Magan Komfata was so disappointed that he banished her from the palace. She was made to live in one of the lesser homes for the lesser wives. But it disturbed him. The whole episode disturbed him. And one day his griot said to him, Sire, why don't you go and see your friend, the blind blacksmith, Nankafuri? He can always help you. He always has wise words for you. Perhaps he can help you in this respect. So Magan Komfata disguised himself and he went into the city of Niani, and he went to the blind blacksmith Nankafori. And Nankafori listened to what the king had to say, and he said, "Sire, a tree once planted does not grow overnight. It must sink its roots deeply into the earth. It must grow towards the sun. It must spread its branches so that it can protect the people who sit beneath. Your son is sinking his roots into the ground. Your son is stretching towards the sun. He's spreading his branches so that when he becomes king, he will know how to protect his people. Sire, have patience. Believe in the prophecy. All will be well." And when Magan Komfata heard those words, he took courage, he took heart, and he went back to his palace, and he insisted that Sogolon Keju was reinstated, and her son too. And when Sundiata, as they called him, when he was 7 years old, the king insisted that he come to a meeting of the elders and a meeting of all the advisors of the palace. All the courtiers were there. Sasma Berete was there. Sogolon was there. The 7-year-old pulled himself along on his backside and sat before his father, the king. Magan Komfata said, "Sundiata, when I die, you will become king. Every king must have his own griot. See, this is my griot. His son here is called Balafasake. He will be your griot. Do you understand?" Sundiata had never spoken. He'd never walked. And all of a sudden, he opened his mouth and he said, "Bala, come here." And the whole court exchanged glances. This was incredible. Balafasake stepped forward and he said, "Yes, Highness." He said, "Sit here beside me." "Yes, Highness," said the young griot, and he sat down. And Sundiata turned himself on his backside towards his griot and he said, "You are my griot. You will be my griot from this day until the day I die, or until the day you die. Do you understand?" "I understand," said Bala. And the king's heart was warmed, and Sogolon's heart was warmed, and the whole court breathed a sigh of relief, because now, perhaps, the prophecy would be fulfilled. Unfortunately, not long after that, when the king slept in his bed, when the whole court was asleep, death entered the palace. Death, your friend and mine, approached the king and whispered sweet words into his ear. The king sat up. Death took the king by the hand and led him out of the palace, away from his cares, away from his worries, away from his wives, away from all the things that come with the trappings of royalty. And now he was just a man. The whole of Mali was shrouded in sadness. The people came for miles for the funeral. Sogolon Keju wept. Sundiata wept. Sasama Berete delighted. And no sooner had the king been buried in the ground than she called a council of elders and advisors. And she said, "I believe that my husband was mad when he made this half man the future king. I am the official queen mother of this kingdom. My son is the official king of this kingdom. This boy, he's a child. And furthermore, have you ever heard of a king who cannot mount his horse and lead his men into battle? No, this will not stand. I insist that my son take the throne." And she was a formidable woman. Who could refuse her? So Sundiata was usurped, and Sogolon and Sundiata were banished from the palace, but not to the lesser house for the lesser wives. That was too good for her. She was made to live in the wood shack at the back of the palace. And when the servants came to collect wood for the cooking and for the warming of the palace, they would laugh at her. The children would come and they would take stones and they would launch them at her, and the stones would bounce off her back. There was barely anything to eat. She wasn't allowed to keep her own kitchen garden even. If she wanted anything, she had to go to Sasama Berete. And Sasama Berete would say either yes or no. Sundiata seemed unconcerned by all of this, as Sogolon daily felt degraded by the whole experience. He would just eat, chew, dribble, eat, dribble, swirl his eyes, fix. That's all he did. It was as though it hadn't occurred to him what had happened to him and to his mother and to all his other brothers and sisters that had been born. One day, Sasama Berete needed baobab leaves just to make a stew. She went to Sasama Berete with a calabash bowl and she said, "Sister Queen, I've come to beg baobab leaves." "You've come to beg baobab leaves." "Sister Queen," she said. "You are no sister to me, and you are no queen. But if I understand why you need to come to me for baobab leaves. Every single child here can climb a tree and pick down baobab leaves for their mother, but your child, useless boy, sits on his backside all day, chewing. My child could always climb the baobab tree, but go home to your little hut. I'll send someone along directly." And I don't know if it was the reference to Sundiata or if it was just the last straw. But Sogolon had had enough. She was utterly, totally, and completely humiliated. And she went back to the wood shack, and what did she find? Sundiata, going through the empty calabashes, scraping out what food there was left, stuck to the bottom. And she lost all reason. She picked up a stick and she began to beat it. She said, "Child of misfortune! Child of misfortune!" And he looked at his mother. She said, "When will you take this shame from my eyes? Child of misfortune!" And Sundiata took the stick away from his mother and he threw it to one side. He said, "Mother, what's the matter?" She said, "I want baobab leaves." He said, "Mother, do you just want baobab leaves? Or do you want the whole tree?" She said, "I want the whole tree! There! I want the whole tree! Here, now, in front of this wood shack! I want the baobab tree here! And then and only then will shame be taken from my eyes!" And Sundiata turned to his griot and he said, "Bala, go to the blacksmith. Ask them to fashion me a length of iron. I'm going to need it. I think I'm going to walk today." And Balafasake sat up and he said, finally the sleeping lion will wake. And he pulled foot and he ran to the blacksmith. Nankafori had prepared a long length of iron many years before. He said to Balafasake, he said, "Is this the day?" And Balafasake said, "This is the day unlike any other day and just like any other day." It took 6 men to lift that length of iron. That length of iron was thrown down on the ground before Sundiata Keita. He upended it with a flick of his wrist, and he held onto it tight. And he pulled himself up and up and up and up and up until he was just dangling in mid-air. Then he took a deep breath, and his legs came down, 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 and they touched the earth. And when he did, thunder clapped and lightning struck, and the people, they rushed forward to see what was happening. And he stood there at the at-ease position with sweat streaming down his brow. He lifted one foot and he strode forwards off into the forest. And the people, they followed him. And his griot went before him saying, "Make way, make way. He is coming. He is coming. Finally, the prediction will come true. The sleeping lion is awake." And Sundiata Keita came to a tree, a baobab tree, not too big, not too small. He wrapped his arms around that baobab tree and he wrenched it out of the earth. And he threw it onto his shoulder effortlessly, as though it was a feather. And then he walked back to where his mother was still sobbing. And he took that baobab tree and he drove it into the ground. And then he said, "Mother, lift your head. You can be proud of your son. Lift your head and wipe your tears. You are more fortunate than you think. From this day forwards, anybody in this palace who needs baobab leaves will come to your tree. And you will give permission for them to climb your tree. No more tears, mother. Mother, are you satisfied?" And she was. And Sasama Berete was furious. Because not only was the prophecy likely to come true, the people's affections were turning towards Sogolon and towards Sundiata. And now they were saying things like, oh, she's such a good mother. She was so patient, and then when it was necessary, she did what she had to do. And then they would say of her, Sasama Berete, she's one of those mothers. Pushy, 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 pushy. And her son, he's vapid and he's weak. It was too much for her. Even when her son was on the throne, they hated him. Even when her son was on the throne, the affections were with Sundiata Keita. She couldn't stand it any longer, and she sent for 9 witches. She said to them, women of the night, there is one amongst us who must not breathe another breath. His name is Sundiata Keita. They are starting to call him the Lion of Manding. He must die. And the chief witch said, Majesty, for every cause there is an effect. You have cause. You wish his death to be the effect. We understand, but we have no cause. Therefore, why should death be the effect? The queen said, yes, yes, you are right, you are right. Very well, this is what we will do. The people have helped his mother to make a kitchen garden. She goes there daily. If you go there and you plunder her kitchen garden, take all the crops, at a certain time when he's coming back from hunting, he will catch you. If he catches you, he will beat you for stealing from his mother. When he beats you, you will have reason to kill him. Expend his life. It is done, they said. And the next day, when they could hear Sundiata singing his way through trees, they began to pluck and pull at the kitchen garden. And he saw them. And when they saw him watching them, do we need to end? Do we need to finish? Have we run out of time? So I'm going to have to rush through that. I can't tell you in detail. I'll tell you what happened. They came. They tried to steal the food. Sundiata caught them, but instead of beating them, he told them to come and take whenever they wanted. And they were so moved by his kindness that they said if he ever needed them in the future, to call on them, which he does in the future. Then, when Sogolon realizes that Sasama Berete was going to kill her son, she decides that they should leave. So they leave, and they go into exile. But Sasama Berete had long fingers, and in every place they went, someone tried to do them in. So finally they came to a place called Meme. And in the kingdom of Meme, there was a king who received them all with an open heart. And he treated Sogolon as his long-lost sister. And he was very impressed with Sundiata, so he made him his prime minister. He made him the general of his armies, even though he was only 14 years old by this time. Finally, one day, Sogolon sat and waited for her son to come back from hunting, and her daughter rushed into the house. She'd been out with the servants into the market and had heard Malian market sellers. But they weren't sellers. They were envoys sent from Mali. They'd been sent because Sasama Berete had gone into cahoots with a very evil king, and the people in Mali were suffering, and they wanted Sundiata to come back and fight for them. So they were presented to Sundiata. When Sundiata heard what they had to say, he said, we will return tomorrow. And Sogolon watched her son, and she saw that he'd grown into his office. He'd grown into the prediction. And so she realized that she could now let go of life, and she died. She died in the kingdom of Meme. Sundiata begged the king of Meme to let him bury his mother in those grounds because he was going home. And the king of Meme, jealous because he wanted Sundiata to be the heir to his throne, told him that he couldn't bury his mother, he had to take her, and that if her body rotted and stunk on the way, he wouldn't care. Sundiata left, and he came back with broken pots and dirt and birds' feathers. And the king's advisor told the king that that meant that if he didn't allow him to bury his mother there, that he would raise Meme to the ground, and all that would be left would be dust and dirt and broken pots for the birds to wash their feathers in. So the king of Meme relented naturally. Sogolon was buried there, and Sundiata made his long journey back to Mali. There's more to this story. It's an epic. That's the first part.